So I'm going to again start with a circle here. Bring it up and around. I'm going to turn it right on its side so it can conform to his back. Scale it down a little bit maybe. And I'm also going to make this a rectangular shape so it can kind of be spanning across his back there, and it kind of implies that that whole area is going to be moving, which it will once we're done with the thing. So I'll create a square, go back to object mode, and I'll scrunch it down. And this will be a nice little handle here if they ever wanted that extra reach in the clavicle. And to better conform to the back, I'm actually going to grab these two control vertexes here and pull it out. So it is rounded more like the way his shoulder is rounded. And that can go right around here. I'll angle it, maybe. Just, I don't know, whatever looks cool, whatever looks best. It's mostly function, but you can make it look pretty if you like. It can kind of look like cool vector armor or something that you're putting on this guy, if you use your imagination. So now that that looks good there, I'm going to move the pivot point into his clavicle. So I'm going to hold D and V again. And if it helps to grab these, so you don't have to grab them from that point, you can actually hold D and V and use the middle mouse button, and it'll snap to wherever you're middle mousing. I actually use the middle mouse button most of all, so I don't actually have to bother reaching over to that pivot point, those extra centimeters, to grab that guy. I can just hold the middle mouse wherever I am. In fact, I could just hold middle mouse over the joint, and then I'm closer to where that should be snapping. If you would like to, you can actually hide your mesh using our layers, and that will help you reach those joints as well. But you'll want to see where the mesh is when you put these controls on to make sure that they're always visible. So that's that side. I'm going to do the same I did with the feet and duplicate this with Shift D. I'm going to bring its pivot point all the way down to the grid, so I'm going to select Snap to Grid, and I'm going to hold down D and V and middle mouse over the grid until that snaps to the center. And now I will freeze the transforms. So I'm going to modify and freeze transformations, and I'll use those frozen transforms to help me mirror this. So I'll make this scale -1, and that will hop right over to the other side. And that looks pretty good actually, considering his shoulder pad's going to be in the way there. Now I'll bring this pivot point right back up to the clavicle joint by holding D and V, and I'll middle mouse over the joint there. And now we can go and name them. So I'll name this first one left clav con, and then right clav con. And that'll be nice, just like that. And speaking of shoulder pads, we're going to need controllers for shoulder pads on both sides. So to make sure I get clearance on the left side here, I'm going to start with this right because we already have the mesh in place. So I'll make the classic circle curve here, and I'll bring it up to where that should be, and we'll scale it. I'm going to turn off the grid snap because that's not useful anymore. I'm going to rotate it a little bit. We're going to make this kind of like he's got that vector shoulder pad armor, like this. That looks cool, right? Like a Super Saiyan or something. That's what it reminds me of anyway. So we'll put this where we think it might be most useful to be grabbing while animating. And I just assume as long as we get good clearance here and it's visible and it's clear that this is controlling the shoulder pad, then we're good. So I'm going to put this like this. That looks pretty good there. And I will move our pivot point to our special shoulder pad joint right next to the shoulder. And now if you rotate this controller from where it is, you can picture that shoulder pad moving right along with it. Now to get that controller on the other side as well, we're going to duplicate it with Shift D. And then we're going to center the pivot point by holding D and V and middle mousing over the grid there, right in the center. Then we're going to go to Modify and Freeze Transforms on that guy and scale it to -1. So it's on the other side now. -1. And there, now it's perfectly mirrored. And if we ever had a shoulder pad on that side, there's a controller there just for the job. And just like before, we're going to hold D and V and middle mouse over our actual joint, so the pivot point is in the right spot. And we're going to call that good. Before we get too far away from the hands, let's just do our hand controllers, because next all we have to do is the rest of the head. So let's come back down here. I'm going to make another circle curve down here and scale that up. I'm going to turn the grid snap off because that's not useful anymore. And we're going to make a cool hand controller. And this guy, I kind of like to have it shaped a little more like a hand so it's not getting in the way of other things. So instead of just having a big circle there, it's nice to have it shaped like a hand. And then when the hand actually moves, it's not intrusive and it doesn't clip through anything. It's just kind of a part of the hand essentially. So I'm going to get this to relatively where I want it to be. Get the rotation kind of lined up there. That way when I move these control vertexes around, they'll be moving on the right axis. But in order to do that, because right now we just have them moving up and down based on world space, we want it based on object space. So if you're not familiar with this yet, see how the rotation is oriented to the direction our shape is facing, and as well the scaling is also oriented on the object. But our movement is, see how it's straight up and down instead of following that curve there? Our movement is based on world space, so we need to change that in the tool settings. So we'll go to Show Hide Tool Settings, and that'll open this tool window here. And now you'll see when you change between your different transform tools, so rotation, translation, and scaling, this box as well changes. So these are all the different tool settings for each one of those options. So if we go to the Move tool and we go to Axis Orientation up here, we see that it's set to World as opposed to Object. So we click that little drop down arrow and we simply click Object. And now we can translate our controller on that axis, and that comes in handy. So I'm done with the tools. I'm going to close that. I'm also going to close our channel box. We don't really need that right now. And now when I select a control vertex, I can transform it, and it will move based off the orientation of our controller, which makes it cleaner for when we're moving these vertexes around. So now I'll kind of get this to where I want it to be. And I don't want anything really in the way of the fingers either, so I'm going to bring that back as well. Just a little bit. Scooch that in. And I want this to kind of wrap around the hand, just so it looks tidy. So I'll grab these control vertexes on the side here, and I'll pull those down. So now it's kind of wrapping around. No matter which angle you're looking at the hand from, you've got a handle to grab. Now, same old trick to get it onto the other side. We're going to duplicate, and then I'm going to hold D and V and middle mouse over the middle of the grid. And then we'll go to Modify, Freeze Transforms. And then we'll scale this over to the other side. In the channel box, we can say -1. And now we know it's perfectly mirrored. And these hand controllers, they're going to want pivot points on the wrist here. So I'm going to hold D and V and middle mouse over the wrist. Make sure that gets where it belongs, where it needs to be. And the same goes for this one here on the left hand. There. So now we can start naming these new controllers that we made. So back to our shoulder pads, we're going to name this one R. Pauldron Con. And I'm going to copy that. For the left one, just change this to left Pauldron Con. And then over here we have the left hand con. And then on the other side we have the right hand con. And next up we have the rest of the head. So we're going to make a neck controller. And normally I'd make a circle and just kind of put it around the whole neck like a necklace. But this guy's got a pretty beefy neck. So we're going to have to treat it kind of like a spine and leave part of the shape sticking out of the back there as a little handle to grab. So scale that in there, widen it a little bit, kind of like we did with the spine. I'm going to angle it kind of so it conforms to the mesh, and then move the pivot point to that neck joint there by snapping it in there. Next one we can do is the head, so I'm going to make a circle here. I'm going to place this on his head kind of like a hat or a halo or something. We just want to make sure that the animator knows that this is going to be controlling the head. And I think that looks pretty good. Now I'm going to move the pivot point where it belongs, right here, and snap that into place.